I know it's around here somewhere. Oh, there it is. I thought I lost my head. Look, it's even got my valve. I'm Brian. Join the adventures as I share what I learned restoring a hurricane-damaged catamaran with the dream to sail the world. Some people think diesels are really complicated or hard to work on, and the truth is they're really simple. And once you understand some basic mechanicking and then basic how all the parts work together, then it's pretty much easy to do whatever you need on the engine. So we're going to cover that here. So first off, we're going to cover how the entire engine works, how everything is interconnected, and what happens. And so the first thing you start with is the starter. The starter is just a small electric motor that is used to start the engine turning so that you can so that it'll start. So it has to have some momentum to start. It has the starter motor and a solenoid, and sometimes you'll have multiple solenoids. And so this is where the heavy cable comes in from your battery and hooks to the side of the solenoid. This is the side of the solenoid that hooks to the motor. And so what a solenoid is it's just a switch. You put a small amount of current here, a small amount of power here, and it connects these two. And then it turns it over. So this is normally hooked to your key. So if you turn your key and you hit start and there's no power here, then it's not going to start. Or the solenoid sometimes will break. It's pretty common. So one of the things you can do, I wouldn't recommend trying this, but I do it all the time, is take a screwdriver and go across these terminals like this. And that's basically the same as a key. And so if you want to hotwire a car or anything or a boat, you just cross this across here and boom, the starter's going to turn over. And it usually sparks all over the place. The starter goes right here. And then there's the flywheel. And this flywheel has what's called a ring gear. And that's got the gears in it. So the little gears there connect to the gears on the flywheel. Flywheel that's out, you can see the gears that go around. And that starts turning. And the flywheel is very heavy. And that creates momentum for the engine to keep the engine going between each time the cylinder fires. Here's the engine disassembled. This is where the flywheel attaches. And here's the crankshaft. And you notice, as this goes around, it changes the from a rotation movement to an up and down movement. And so your starter starts this turning. As that turns, it connects to your pistons via a connecting rod right there. Basically, as this goes around, it's going to cause those pistons to move up and down in that cylinder. It's a 4-stroke engine, so that means the cylinders are going to go up and down 2 times for every time it fires. This is the main crankshaft that's hooked to the pistons. So as this rotates, the pistons go up and down. As that rotates, it turns this gear. This gear isn't hooked to anything, it's just an idler gear. And that gear turns this gear, which is on the camshaft. And the camshaft is what makes the valves open. And it's called a cam because it's got lobes on it. And so they're kind of look like teardrops, and they're down in the holes here. I don't know if you can see it, but as this goes around, that lobe on it will go up and down, and that up and down is what pushes tappets or the lifters, and then that goes to the push rods, which goes into the rocker arm, which then pushes the valves up and down. So when we rotate the engine, you can see how the cam will push the push rods up across the rocker arms, and the timing from this gear that was under this cover then opens and closes the valves at the correct time. So if you remember the cycles, first we open the intake valve with this cylinder, and so that piston's going down right now, and then it closes. Now the piston's coming up right now, and it then is going to explode. Boom, it injects, and then it's at the bottom. Just push to the bottom, and then this guy here, the exhaust valve is opening, and then that's blowing the air out to the exhaust here. And that completes 2 revolutions of the engine, and the exhaust is out, and then the intake opens and it starts over again. And it's really easy to turn because the injectors are out, and with the injectors out, it can just blow the air out. But if the injectors are in, then it actually compresses the air, so it becomes pretty hard to turn over. And then these are the glow plugs, and when the engine is cold or when it hasn't started yet, that just puts a little heat in the cylinder to get the initial ignition on. And so that's why you have on a diesel, you have like a wait to start. You turn on the glow plugs, get it warm in there, and then when it injects the fuel, it'll ignite. I had one engine on my excavator, and it didn't have glow plugs. It had kind of a heater in line, but it wasn't even hooked up. It didn't need it. I think there was just so much compression that no matter how cold it was below freezing, and I'd use it, the thing would just start right up. It's kind of cool. The gear ratio on this is going to be 2 to 1, because every time this goes around twice, the valve opens once, as we talked about before. Depends on where it is in the cycle. The same with this. This is the injection pump. The timing on this is critical because we have to have the valves opening and closing at the right time. We have to have the injection pump shooting in the fuel at exactly right before it gets to top dead center, comes up, and because it takes a second, or it takes nanoseconds or something for it to ignite, and so then when it gets to the top, it explodes here and pushes it back down. So that's why this is really critical, and it's important you don't take out these bolts. If you take out these bolts, this gear can rotate and get out of alignment, and then you got to time it. I accidentally did that on the other engine, and I had to align the timing on the fuel pump. So with this, it has gears. I mean, these gears have marks, and so this one here is A to A, B to B, C to C, and as long as you haven't pulled these 4 bolts, that's going to put the camshaft in time, that's going to put this in time, and so you have to get it just right before you put this back together. And so then when it rotates, because that's the 3 things that you need to make this run. You're going to need compression, so the rings and the valves and everything have to seal to come up and compress. You're going to have timing, which means the valves are opening and closing at the right time, which affects your compression. And then you have to have your fuel timed properly with the fuel injecting at the exact right time. Those 3 things, and your engine will run. Now, there's a lot of other things other than having the engine run. You want to have, for example, you want to have oil. The oil will circulate through the engine in order to lubricate it and keep everything from overheating, because metal on metal is very bad. This is the housing that goes right on the front of the engine here. Inside of this housing is a pump, and so it's got these little marks here that will line up to some flat spots on the crank, and as it rotates, this pump will suck oil from here, this guy here, which hooks up to that guy there, which goes down to that pickup that we saw in the oil pan, sucks the oil up through there, in here, it pumps it, and it pumps it out through here, and when you pump it out through here, it goes throughout the entire engine, going through here, goes up to the valves, lubricates the cylinders. It even goes into the fuel pump because it needs it to be lubricated with oil, and so then the oil will circulate up and then it will drain back down into that. You also need water cooling, and that's what this hole is for. The water pump, which is going to go on the front of this, the freshwater pump, will circulate water, coolant water, through the engine. That's also what these things are for here. This is the water jacket, goes through those holes, and then these holes here are for oil, little ones, and the oil will circulate through there. If any of those get plugged up, you don't get oil in your engine, it's going to seize up. If you don't have water, your engine overheats. So those are important too. I mean, it'll run without it. It'll run without oil. It'll run without water, just not very long. Now that we've covered all the basics of how the diesel engine works, you'll understand a lot better as we start to put the thing together during the rebuild of what all the parts do. So the first process in this is to take the engine completely apart, and here I've disassembled it and I start to clean it. Now these engines are a little bit different than if I was doing a standard rebuild, because these engines are almost new. They're from 2018 and the boat was damaged in 2019. So really what we're doing is we're cleaning up and replacing any parts that were damaged from it being underwater, not so much from being worn out. And so there's some things where you would normally check and measure tolerances to make sure your pistons are good and things like that. We don't have to do any of that because there's hardly any wear on this engine at all. It's just a matter of cleaning it up. I was doing a full rebuild on this engine. I'd probably have it hot tanked, which means they dip it in a big tank at the machine shop and it comes out all clean and grease free and rust free and everything. But I'm not going to take the crankshaft out, and I'm going to leave some parts on. So the camshaft's staying in. So I'm just cleaning it up, which takes a little bit extra time. I spent a couple hours on it, and it's just a matter of hitting the thing with the drill, with the wire wheel. And I've got the small one on now, but you know, I'll use the bigger ones, or this shape. This shape is pretty good for getting a bunch of the spots. And then what I can't get with that, I get these little tiny cracks in here with this. I'll give it a good wash and degreasing before I put the paint on. But I want to keep it a little bit oily now, because you'd be surprised, like this stuff, if you were to use a good degreaser on it, it'll start getting surface rust, I mean, within a few minutes even. The first step for putting this thing back together, I want to put the pistons in, because the crankshaft, camshaft are already in there. You would do that first. So I want to hone the cylinders, and these cylinders are in pretty good shape, as you can see. There's not any ridge. Normally what happens, you can see where the ring kind of comes up to here, and so normally what will happen is it'll wear the cylinder down and there'll be a ridge there. But this engine is so new that there's not even a ridge there. But it's a good idea to take the glazing off with the hone before I put it back together. And this is the hone I have. This is a dangerous hone. Not dangerous in that you'll hurt yourself, but dangerous in that you can do too much damage if you hone too much with this, because it'll take off a lot. So we're just going to very gently take the glazing off with this guy. So to do that, I cleaned the cylinders out, wiped them out with a paper towel. I wiped my hone down, and then I'm going to oil it, put it in the drill, and let's get to honing. Now it's really tempting when you're honing to like totally get carried away because it looks so good and it's cleaning up so nice, but really you have to think about it, you're just putting wear on your engine. So we just want a very light polishing, and you see how we got nice hash marks in there in each of these. And so it's just important to go slow, take your time. Some engines need a lot more honing than this, but this one is just very light touch up, kind of a little bit metallic, right, or gritty, because it has that. So very careful not to get any of that into the crank side, because that I'm not taking the crank and the crank bearings out. So I want to turn this upside down when I wash it, so that I wash all that stuff out. And you want to use something that breaks down the oil. So dish soap is pretty good for that. But as soon as we got to get it done, we got to get oil on there right away, because they'll start to rust almost immediately. Well, there it is. The deed is done. I'm sure someone in a real shop or a professional could have done a lot better job, but this, it turned out good. It's nice and clean. The cylinders look good, so let's put the pistons in. We are now ready to assemble the pistons. The first thing you want to do is check the manual. So you can download, for Yanmars anyway, you can download the service manual online, which is super helpful. So it's important points about making sure that the rings are installed with the manufacturer's marking facing up, and that they're staggered, and that the oil ring is its joint is opposite and vertical to the piston pin. So the top ring shouldn't be, you know, that's what they did right here. It says top ring joint and it's directly over the piston pin. Whatever they said not to do, they did it in their picture. Okay, you got to make sure that like all these piston tracks are clean, and the best way to do that is actually with an old ring, preferably a broken section of the old ring, and you can run it through here. Make sure we get everything cleaned out of there. The problem is if you get stuff jammed in there and you put the new rings in and they won't compress all the way, they'll break when you put the piston in. So, I mean, this engine has very low time on it, so there's not like any carbon. Like, these things are really clean in there, but sometimes they'll be built up with all sorts of junk. And then the new piston rings, as they're not as worn, will need to compress tighter and they won't fit in the cylinder, and you break stuff. The bottom ring, which is the oil ring, and they call it the oil ring is because, I don't know, it basically oils the cylinder. So as the oil comes in, it's got little valves in the piston, and it's usually split, and it collects oil and oils the cylinder wall as it goes up and down. I don't know how it does it. Put this guy in. So this guy feeds into this thing. So that's basically a spring, and we want that to be at 180 degrees from this thing when we put it on. So let's turn the piston over like this. Now this is a ring expander. I like to use that because you have less chance of breaking the rings, but you can certainly do it just by walking the rings on. These guys are marked T1 and T2, and then it says that the stamp goes to the top. So I assume, yeah, this one, you know, and they don't fit in the wrong holes, but still, you don't want to force them. Okay, so let's start with T2 next. Put it in my ring expander. Oop. Okay, so that one I just walk down. And see, like, you can just take it like this and walk it down to the next level, but sometimes you'll break it if you do that. There we go. Very gentle with the ring expander, and you know, you can do a little bit, but you just don't want to break them. Double check. Yep. Marking at the top. Marking at the top. So, one assembled. Let's put it in the engine. We need this next tool. And you can do this like without these tools. You don't need a ring expander. But you know, for me, this is like super cheap, and well, rings are 40 bucks for this engine, so it's better than accidentally breaking a ring. And this is just a couple bucks. I think this might be a Harbor Freight one. These are either Harbor Freight or Amazon. One of the things with working with engines is it's like the most dirty, grimy job that you have to try to keep everything as clean as you possibly can so you don't contaminate it, because dirt and grime, that's what, not the oiliness, but the dirt and grime that it collects, that's one of the major wear factors for your engine. So you got to keep that out. And like all that stuff from honing, the extra grit and stuff, you got to keep that out. All right, let's get the rings aligned how we want them. Put that one there. This one over here. Maybe like that. That. And that. You can use oil, but I just use this overpriced lube, engine assembly lube. Put some lube right around here. Pop the bearing out. You can get bearings in different sizes. Because this engine's new, it has what they call standard. And so if your crankshaft gets too worn, they can turn it down smaller size, and you can get oversized bearings. You don't need oil on that side. Because it should not be turning. If it turns on the outside, you get a problem. But it's got this little stopper to keep it from turning. But you do need oil on this side. Okay. So, marking side up. Make sure our rings are still in a fairly good position. You know, when they say top ring, I think they mean bottom ring, because it makes sense to not have the oil ring over the piston pin, but it doesn't really make sense to have the other one. So we're going to take this tool and put some oil on it. We'll hold the piston off just a little bit. Tighten this guy down. This is where it's really easy to break rings. Trying to make sure that it goes in. It's not hanging up on the bottom side. Okay. Success. Yeah, you can, if you see, yep, you see right down in there. Maybe you can see down there, that piston needs to rotate ever so slightly to get lined up. Very carefully, not to touch the bearing. I want to give that piston a slight turn. There, goes. Just kind of pushing on the piston, pushed up and got it in place. That little tag there goes in that little hole there. Push it down. Oops, there you go. Make sure it snaps into place properly. All this stuff, you just want to not force anything. Everything will just snap into place gently if you're patient. So there's oil channels that run through the crankshaft, and oil comes out that little hole there. So I'm just putting a little bit of extra lube, because when you start up the engine, it's not lubricated the first time. It's important that when you put this cap on, that the cap goes on the correct orientation. You can't put on backwards, and you tell by the stamp, and it's stamped on the rod as well. And the stamp goes toward, for this engine based off the manual, goes toward the side with the fuel pump, which I just put that on backwards. Alright, I'm going to get a wrench and just barely tighten those up until I have all the pistons, and then I'll come back and torque them all. Just a tiny snug with the wrench. And then I have to put Loctite on them anyway, so I'll take them back out one at a time, but we'll torque them all together. Piston X should be fun, because it's got a new piston. So I'm going to put this all the way at the lowest position so that it's easier to drive the piston in. Okay, one of the things when we do the piston, we have the ability to get a swapped orientation. So we got to be careful that we, when we take this apart, that we take it apart and put the piston in the same way. Beautiful new piston. Look at that. The rings. In order to get this guy out, you have to drive the pin out. So we've got, there's a snap ring in there. So for that, you need snap ring pliers, which are these things, see? I mean, you can do it with screwdrivers or a couple nails, whatever. But you fight it for like 20 minutes and it goes flying out, but it's so easy with these. Okay. And they say you need the official tool to push it out. Well, here's my official one. Okay. So before we go too far, let's take the new piston, line it up matching the old one, which it has these indentations for the valves, so that's the top. So it's going to look just like this. So we push this all the way out. Set that there. Start to go in. Some lube. Careful not to turn this. And voila. Double check that we have it right. Writing on the top, valve kind of at the top. This one writing at the top. Valve spacing on the top, looks good. In there. Just little snap rings. Now it's really easy on these snap rings to think that they're in place, but they're really not. Because it's like, oh yeah, it's in there, but it's not in there. This one's not even in the right spot. It's like way too far in. Yeah, there it goes. So you got to make sure it's in its groove, because it can be in the hole but not in its groove. Yeah, see, like that is in the hole, but it's not in the groove. So you just kind of push on it a little bit. There it goes, snapped right in. Now it's fully into the groove. Yeah, something feels wrong here. Oh, my, yeah, you want to watch, like, here my ring expander, my ring compressor, isn't flush. There we go. So, because you don't want, like, one ring to pop out of this side. So before you push the piston, you got to make sure this thing is flush down against there. If I put this straight up vertical, because I got it, I guess I can. The rod from catching on stuff as it goes down. I'm a bit paranoid. So these bolts have a kind of a spline groove in here so that they don't work out, but you know, they're just tiny bolts. So I clean the threads, spray a little cleaner on them, dry them off. A little bit of orange thread locker. Now this is permanent removable, or high strength removable. And then normally you want a little bit of oil under this part of the head, but there's oil on the thing, so that there's not a resistance there for it turning. Now the torque specs for this are 22 to 27.5 Newton meters. You don't want to use an extension if you can get away without it, because the extension on a torque wrench makes it inaccurate. So this is a pretty decent torque wrench I brought. And so I've got it set at 20 Newton, oops, this side, 20 Newton meters. And that's important. If you want it to be accurate, you store it at its correct thing in its case and keep it from getting rusted or anything. So get a cheap torque wrench, it won't torque right. All right. Oh, there we go. Oh, that clicks. So that's 20. Let's go up to about 22. Up to 24. 327. There we go. The next thing we need to put on before we put the oil pan on is the oil pickup. What this does is this goes here and picks up the oil from the bottom of the oil pan and sucks it up through the engine. One of the important things to not forget is this little O-ring. Goes right on here. Now, I did a car once, a Saab, 1980s-ish Saab, and I replaced the transmission, which also is the oil pan, in that it sits under its front-wheel drive. It's kind of a weird thing. And I don't know if I forgot this, or there was, the other problem is there could be two, like you leave the one on here and leave another one, and then two O-rings don't seal very good together. I don't know if it was that, or if I bent or damaged the pickup tube putting it back on, But whatever the case was, I didn't have oil pressure. It was bad. I ended up scrapping the car or selling it for parts, but needless to say, we're not going to do that here. A little bit of Loctite. I always put Loctite on all the internal components because once the engine's together, you don't want anything inside falling apart. That'd be bad. Next, it's time to put the oil pan on, and I start spreading the gasket sealer on it and put it on, and all of a sudden realized, wait a minute, I'm missing a bolt. And I dropped that bolt in when I test fit it inside there. So I had to take the thing, shake it upside down, clean the sealant back off, and reapply the sealant. It was quite a pain, but we got it back on. And this completes what's generally considered the bottom end of the engine. We're going to do the top end in the next video series, but all we have left to do with this is paint it. Now I'm headed back down to Florida for another trip, and I haven't got the next part 2 where we're going to do the top end, put this thing together, and see if it runs. So hopefully I can get that done while I'm down there. If not, it'll have to wait for a couple weeks till I get back, and you'll see part 2, and we'll figure out if this thing is going to start up on us. Until next time, guys, remember, live your dreams and cross your fingers that this engine's going to run. And don't forget, like the video, leave me an encouraging comment, and of course, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet. Of course, it's free. And click the notification. I get some people that saying, oh, you haven't posted in a while, but they're just not getting notifications because of the way YouTube works. So be sure to click the notification. See you next time.